So we're talking about profit sharing. We're talking about maybe you could call it sharecropping. We're going to lease a field, and the rental might be just in straight cash terms, but it might also be a proportion of the rent. And if the rental is a proportion of the yield, and if the rent is a proportion of the yield, i.e., if the landlord shares the produce of the field, then the landlord is going to be affected by what happens to it. And the Mishnah brings various examples of kind of situations that can work out with the produce. They all begin, by the way, Hamakabel Sadeh Mechavero, someone who I've translated here as leases a field, but we could say receives a field. And this is like halachic poetry. This stream of Mishnayot all begin. Hamakabel Sadeh Mechavero. Someone receives a field from Chavero, from his fellow, from his neighbor. So there is some kind of social context here. We're not dealing with the anonymous legal situation of litigation as it is today, but he gets the field from Chavero, from someone he has a relationship with. Let's jump into the Mishnah. We're in the 6th Mishnah of the 9th chapter. Hamakabel Sadeh Mechavero, someone leased or received a field from his fellow. Va'achala Hagav, and locusts ate it. Gosh, this is one of the plagues. Locusts ate it. Achala Hagav. Or nishtafa, maybe it was blasted. The shidafon is one of the curses that can affect the whole of the country that's recited in Kitavor at the end of Deuteronomy. Shidafon is a curse, like Hagav, like locusts. And the Mishnah goes on to now draw a distinction. Imakat medinahi menakelo min chachoro. If it was a statewide affliction, if everything in the region was blasted or was eaten, he can reduce his rent. And we've seen this before in other rental situations, that if, for example, you rent a cow and it's taken away by the agents of the king, then the renter can say to the owner, well, look, I have no control over the agents of the king taking your cow. And even if I had not rented it, they would have come and taken it anyway. In other words, even if you had held on to your property, it would still have been taken away by the agents of the king. And maybe that's the issue here, that essentially the landlord's field would have been decimated by the locusts or blasted by the wind, even if he hadn't rented it out. And maybe it's on that basis that the rent is reduced. And the Mishnah goes on to say, V'im eina makat medina, if it wasn't a nationwide, a statewide affliction, maybe the locusts only ate that field. Eino menakelo min chachoro. If it's not statewide, he doesn't reduce his rent. Maybe there's some implication that the tenant could have kept away the locusts or could have protected the field from the wind. Rabbi Yudah says, Im kibla mimena b'ma'ot, if he'd rented it from him for a fixed amount of money. Some of these rentals are on a profit share basis, and some are just straight money, straight rental. Im kibla mimenu b'ma'ot, if he rented it from him for a fixed amount of money. In neither case can he reduce his rent. So this assumption of risk, if there's a nationwide disaster, only applies if the landlord is taking on profit as well, not if the landlord is taking on a fixed rent. What if the quality of the wheat is damaged? In other words, if the the field produces, but the quality is damaged. Hamakabel sadeh mechavero ba'asara horim chitim. The same beginning. Hamakabel sadeh mechavero. Someone leases a field from his fellow, and he's going to pay him a fixed fee, but it's in wheat. He's going to pay him 10 kur of wheat. But aseret korim chitim. He's going to pay 10 kur of wheat. So it is a fixed fee, but it's the wheat. And the assumption is that it's the wheat from the field. Because the Mishnah goes on to say, lakat, if it's blasted, noten lo mitocha, he pays him out of this crop. If the crop's damaged with the wind blasting, he still gets paid out of the damaged crop. And by the way, and of course he takes that loss. And similarly, he takes the profit. Hayu chitei yafot. If the wheat were good, I mean, yafot is more than good. It's beautiful. If he has a great crop, hayu chitei yafot. The wheat were fantastic. Similarly, he's going to get paid out of that crop. His 10 kurs are going to be out of the beautiful wheat. Lo yomarlo. The tenant can't say to him, Hareini lokeach lach min hashuk. The tenant can't say, oh, I'm going to go out and buy you ordinary wheat from the market and keep the lovely wheat for myself. Ela noten lo mitucha. He pays him from within it, i.e. from within the field. In other words, the landlord, if he's taking responsibility for a loss, he's also or for damage, he's also taking responsibility for benefit. Now, we remember when we began this series of Mishnayot, Makabel Sadeh Mechavero, someone leasing a field from his fellow, we began with the responsibility of the tenant to weed it, to take care of it, so as to hand it back in good condition. And as we close down this issue, we're going to return to the question of the tenant's responsibility. And we're going to get into issues of crop rotation, which we think of as a very kind of a modern it's a modern technical approach to growing crops. But really interesting that the Mishnah seems to know about it, or at least the Gemara knows about it. Hamakabel sadeh mechavero. Someone leases a field from his fellow. It's the same beginning. Lizaras orim, he rents it to sow barley. Lo yizra enna chitim, he can't sow wheat. Chitin yizra enna sorim, if it is for wheat, he can sow barley. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel oser, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel forbids. So this is really interesting. We can, according to the first opinion in the Mishnah, we can rent to plant a low quality crop, and we're not allowed to plant a higher quality one that may perhaps take more nutrients out of the ground, but we can go the other way around, although Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel will forbid. The Mishnah repeats itself. Let's keep going. Kitnit, lo yizra'ena tivua, someone who leases to sow pulses, kitnit are pulses. Someone who leases for pulses can't sow grain. Kitnit lo yizra'ena tvua yizra'ena kitnit. But for grain, he can sow pulses. Same asymmetric ruling. And again, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel oser. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel forbids. He says essentially that when you rent a field for a certain purpose, you have to go through with it. And the Gemara wonders, well, what is going on here? What is the reason of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel? And the first explanation brought by the Gemara is something to do with truth. This is Rav Chisda now, third generation Amora. And he quotes a verse from Zephaniah, that well-known prophet Zephaniah. Sherit Israel lo yasu avla velo yidabru kazav velo yimatzeh b'fihem lashon tarmit. the remnant Israel, the exiles of Israel, they shan't do iniquity, nor speak lies, nor shall a deceitful tongue be found in their mouth. In other words, when we say we're going to do something, we have to do it. And that, by the way, that's a principle we've seen running right the way through the Mishnah of Bava Metzia, which is all to do, of course, with interpersonal contracts. When we say something, we do it. Someone who backs out of a contract is dealt with like the generation of the flood. So that's Rav Chisda. Let's keep going. Let's go now forward about 50 years. We're going to go forward another generation to Abaya. Abaya is the student of Rabbah. Abaya has a different explanation. Amar Abaya, Tama de Rabban Shimon ki demar. The reason of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is from the master, Mar. The master, of course, is his teacher. Damar Mar, because the master taught. Hai man tenichale, de tit bayar area. Someone who wants his land to lay fallow, in other words, to recover from the crop, someone who wants his land to rest. Lizra shata chite veshata saare. He should plant wheat one year and barley the next year. He should rotate his crops. Shata shti veshata erev. He should plow it lengthwise one year and crosswise the other year. Abaya, in the name of Rabbah, seems to have some idea about crop rotation. If we want our land to carry on with its strength, to carry on producing what it's supposed to produce, we need to rotate the crops. And of course, now we can see the issue about pulses, because we know that if we rotate, I mean, this is modern farming technology, right? But it's very, 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 very famous. Classic, at least in the UK, farming technology, that you rotate grains and pulses, and then you actually plow in the pulses at the end of the year. You rotate grains and pulses, and you increase the nitrogen content in the soil. And, well, that's modern sort of farming in the UK, but it seems that according to Abaya, in the name of Rabbah, seems that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel knew this as well. And that's a fascinating insight into agriculture in the time of the Mishnah and the technical knowledge of our sages.